Jeffrey Epstein is not a name that requires context. Anyone browsing YouTube outside of the For Kids section of the website is more than likely familiar with who he is, but the same way that historical texts have preserved the infamy of Roman emperors, like Nero or Caligula, as a result of their cruelty, digital archives, for as long as they continue to exist in the future, will likely preserve the sickening legend of Jeffrey Epstein. Born and raised in New York City after humble beginnings as a physics and mathematics teacher, the story of Jeffrey Epstein and his meteoric rise to fame and fortune is the story of elite corruption. What do you do when hundreds of the world's most powerful businessmen, financiers, politicians, and public figures are closely associated with a man who has been convicted of horrifying crimes? The answer to that question obviously changes by perspective. If you had no involvement whatsoever, the attitude is pretty simple. Bring these people to justice. But what about if you did have something to do with it? What if your friends had something to do with it, or your boss, or the principal investors in your company? What then? Do you lie, destroying evidence and silencing witnesses? Do you make it a spectacle, distracting from what's real, muddying the waters, and pray that everyone forgets about it? Or do you simply ignore the problem and hope that the existing power structure protects itself? I would argue, hence the video existing in the first place, that the currently dominant elite power circles of the world are doing all of these things, cycling between them frantically as they grapple with the question of what to do when hundreds of your peers are closely connected to a man like Jeffrey Epstein. Let's get started. The first thing we need to do is establish foundation and clarify an exceedingly dominant misconception, which is Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book, also known as Exhibit 52. Exhibit 52, that is the Little Black Book, is very often misunderstood. As an example of that, here's an exchange between current Vice President of America, J.D. Vance, and a prominent conservative influencer named Jack Posobiec back in 2021 about how the DOJ, Department of Justice, in conjunction with Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team, struck a deal where her Little Black Book would never be made public. For those that don't know, Ghislaine Maxwell was Epstein's co-conspirator responsible for executing large amounts of his very prolific sex trafficking enterprise. Fundamentally, the statement itself is true. In 2021, as part of the United States versus Maxwell trial proceedings, a motion in limine was filed and partially granted, excluding Exhibit 52 from being made public, though parts of it were still shown to the jury. Reading from the motion itself, the argument was that, quote, given their unknown date of creation, the lack of any authenticating witness, and the fact that the documents do not appear until 2009, 5 years after the end of the conspiracies charged in the indictment, there is no relevance that can be attached to the information. And then further down, quote again, the documents cannot be authenticated, and no evidentiary foundation exists that would allow for the admission of the documents. Thus, who may or may not be the author of whatever ended up as these photocopies is not evidence that can or should be considered by any jury in this matter, end quote. Obviously, the job of any lawyer representing any client is to make sure that anything disfavorable to them is excluded from the public or the trial, but this redaction of public evidence, fueled by influencers, politicians, and pundits, became the foundation of a widespread misconception that Exhibit 52 was some sort of client list. To this day, confusingly, you'll often see the Little Black Book referred to as his or separately hers, depending on the context of the isolated conversation. And a large number of people, even now, believe that the Little Black Book, of which there is only one, by the way, not multiple, is a smoking gun. This is where it gets interesting. It turns out that despite being suppressed by the court, the Little Black Book, at least a heavily redacted version of it, was actually released by a website, now defunct, called Gawker in 2015. Rather than some sort of client rundown, it was more like a contact list. But soon afterward, in certain dark corners of the online world, the unredacted version was also made public. Obviously, the footage is blurred for the video in the background because it contains the accurate residence phone number and email addresses for a bunch of the most powerful elite people in the world, and I'm pretty sure the video would get instantly nuked if I ever showed any of it. But the truth here is that this material has been accessible for almost a decade, if you know where to look. Even still, the fact that the thing most widely regarded as a smoking gun isn't even really a smoking gun, and has been public for almost a decade, didn't stop the rumor mills and the conspiracy theories from turning. This is where I have to use a few examples. Long before the July of 2025 Epstein disaster, which is currently unfolding, numerous government officials, subsequent, former, and current, made decisive statements about files, names, releasing information, and overall transparency. These are by no means the only statements that were ever made, but here's a few notable examples. Speaking to Piers Morgan, counselor to the United States President himself, Alina Habba, said, quote, "We have flight logs, information, names that will come out. I don't see how it's not shocking that there are so many individuals that were hidden and kept secret and not held accountable," end quote. Speaking to Fox News, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, "A truckload of evidence arrived. It's now in the hands of the FBI," end quote. During another Fox News interview afterwards, which I'll be playing this time instead of quoting because of how hyper-relevant it is, she directly stated that the Epstein client list was on her desk.
DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients? Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that. I'm reviewing JFK files, MLK files. That's all in the process of being reviewed because that was done at the directive of the president from all of these agencies.
There's also Deputy Director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, prior to holding that post, saying, quote, "That Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go. There are a lot of people who are knee-deep in the Washington swamp who are not telling you the truth," end quote. And lastly, most importantly, I might add, there was current FBI Director Kash Patel, once again prior to his appointment to the post, speaking to conservative influencer Benny Johnson and being asked about why the FBI would deliberately withhold Epstein's list, saying, quote, "Simple, because of who's on that list," end quote. Underscoring that point, speaking to Glenn Beck this time, FBI Director Kash Patel in 2023, responding to the explicit question, "Who has Jeffrey Epstein's little black book?" said, quote, "That's under direct control of the director of the FBI. On day one, roll out the black book. Not just that, on day one, roll out all the text messages and communications we were told were deleted," end quote. It's particularly interesting to look back at all of these statements now, considering that Kash Patel is currently the director of the FBI at this point in time. Let's recap before going fully down the rabbit hole. The Little Black Book, despite being suppressed by the court during United States v. Maxwell, has been widely available unredacted for years. Despite that fact, many people not only still view it to be a smoking gun, but simultaneously demand it be released on day one should President Trump be successfully reelected, which he was. But what really happened after that? Well, what happened was a PR stunt. In February of 2025, shortly after the re-election of Donald Trump, a two-pronged document release, with big air quotes around those words, took place, seemingly orchestrated by Attorney General Pam Bondi. The first half of the stunt was a collection of conservative influencers, stooges really, who were given a binder labeled The Epstein Files Phase 1, and then did a pathetic little parade photo shoot in front of the White House. The second half of the stunt was a press release by the Office of Public Affairs titled First Phase of Declassified Epstein Files, containing a statement from FBI Director Kash Patel reading, quote, "There will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and no stone left unturned, and anyone from the prior or current bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. If there are gaps, we will fill them. If records have been hidden, we will uncover them, and we will bring everything we find to the DOJ to be fully assessed and transparently disseminated to the American people as it should be. The oath we take is to the Constitution, and under my leadership, that promise will be upheld without compromise," end quote. Sounds real good, right? Yeah, sure, maybe. But as we can very clearly see after checking the files that they provided in the statement, not only was this public information already, all of it, this was merely a further redacted version of the same little black book that had been misunderstood, misrepresented, and widely scrutinized for an entire decade. Apparently not even the director of the FBI has an accurate understanding of what this piece of evidence is. In my opinion, that's already very bad, but it gets infinitely worse. For some reason, why I'll never know or understand, the administration began making jokes about all of this. Widely displeased with how transparently useless the PR stunt had been, supporters of the administration began voicing discontent at the entire Epstein debacle on social media, after which the House Judiciary Committee posted, quote, "Breaking Epstein Files Released," with a link that contained Epstein Files V2 in the URL. Considering the fact that the previous lackluster, almost insulting declassification stunt, which contained zero new information whatsoever, was still hanging fresh in the atmosphere, the stench was still permeating, the surrounding air, People began clicking to see what these files might contain, only to find out that the link redirected to a YouTube video by Rick Astley, which is known as Rick rolling, aka trolling. It's a joke about getting people to click something that they think they want to see or that they think is valuable, but then it's not there. It's just this music video. The Trump administration was now mocking and laughing at the people who wanted to know the full story behind the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. But hold on, because it gets so much worse from there. Released by Axios on July 6th of 2025, a joint DOJ FBI memo stated, quote, "As part of our commitment to transparency, the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have conducted an exhaustive review of investigative holdings relating to Jeffrey Epstein. To ensure that the review was thorough, the FBI conducted digital searches of its databases, hard drives, and network drives, as well as physical searches of squad areas, locked cabinets, desks, closets, and other areas where responsive material may have been stored. These searches uncovered a significant amount of material, including more than 300 gigabytes of data and physical evidence." End quote. Further down, skipping to the most relevant portions here for the sake of time, quote again, "This systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. There was also no credible evidence found that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals as part of his actions. We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties," aka it's over, we're not going to prosecute anyone. And again, further down, "After a thorough investigation, FBI investigators concluded that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City on August 10th, 2019. All of this, combined with the fact that the administration had already executed their Phase 1 PR stunt, on top of the innumerable claims about covering up names and evidence across multiple agencies and prominent administrative individuals who are now elected or appointed to public office, this is what sent people over the edge, okay, this memo. But to make things infinitely worse, the level of discrepancy in what we're being told is unignorable. It has been claimed for years that Jeffrey Epstein ran a sophisticated trafficking ring with hundreds, potentially thousands of victims. He operated a private island with his own jet to and from called the Lolita Express, where dozens of the world's most powerful people frequently visited, gathered, and spent a tremendous amount of time. But now we're told that's it. There's no clients, there's no incriminating footage of third parties, and there was no blackmail, on top of the claim that he simply committed suicide, so case closed. In tandem with this wildly suspect denial, after officials in the Trump administration have been loudly proclaiming that the Epstein files would be released eventually, there's 10 hours and 52 minutes of prison block footage. And this is where things just completely go off the rails. The number of inconsistencies, contradictions, and issues with this footage are almost indescribable. But for the sake of time and clarity, I'll focus on a few of the much more damning ones. First, supposedly, as per the original Office of Inspector General report, following Epstein's death, most of the cameras malfunctioned, logically inspiring the question, so where did this footage come from? And second, the guards on duty at the time allegedly fell asleep for multiple hours, fabricated rounds reports, while leaving Jeffrey Epstein alone in his cell for an extended period of time, which allowed him the perfect opportunity to take his own life. Accepting that scenario as fact is already difficult, and I don't, but let's examine this new footage, which supposedly proves that no foul play was involved. First things first, this is not Jeffrey Epstein's door. This is the entrance to SHU. The stairway immediately across from the camera, and barely visible, only a tiny sliver of it is what leads to the door of Epstein's cell, which has already caused mass confusion, as rumors circulate that the door in the video is not the same as the door in the original report, which is true, but not really an issue by itself. What is an issue is this guy at 12:06:01, but not because of the person, rather because of where he goes. This man, upon entering the block, throws what appears to be laundry, slightly moves a trash can, then walks out of frame one floor down to the right-hand side, and he never comes back into vision. What this means is that there's another entrance, which allows access off camera, and that second entrance also then allows access to the stairs directly leading to Epstein's cell. Big issue, but next one, let's move on. Next up is this. At precisely 10:40, if you go frame by frame, originally discovered, I believe, by a man named Adam Cochran on Twitter, you can see something orange climbing up the stairs. This is a problem because as per the original DOJ report, quote, the OIG determined that SHU staff did not conduct any 30-minute rounds after approximately 10:40 p.m. on August 9th, and that the count slips and round sheets had been falsified, end quote. This is a discrepancy, a bad one, because despite that initial report, no rounds were conducted at or around 10:40, instead only seeing a very brief, barely perceptible orange sleeve or piece of linen maybe climbing the stairs. Maybe it's someone bringing something to his cell. Maybe it's Epstein himself or a different prisoner wearing the signature orange. But any explanation for this contradicts the original report. It was previously claimed that no one approached his cell and that the guards were asleep for an extended period of time. But as we can clearly see by watching these 10 hours of footage, someone did. And the guards were never asleep for an extended period. They and others were walking around consistently. Here's an even more interesting one, okay? Look at the railings. What do you see? The correct answer is 2 unpainted wooden railings on the outside facing into the center. But if you check the crime scene photos from the initial report, you can very clearly see that only 1 railing is unpainted. This may sound like a trivial difference to a lot of people, but it has very clear implications. One of 3 things must be true, okay? Either A, they allowed a worker into the area during an active investigation shortly after a suicide, who then painted the railing after Epstein was dead but before the crime scene photos were taken. That's a very short window of time, by the way, where presumably the entire area should be locked down completely. B, there are mistakes and mislabeled entries in the crime scene photos of the original report, which is not a good thing. Or C, the camera is in a different location compared to what we're being told. And just to be clear, one of those 3 things must be true. There is no 4th option. How about this? Like I said, there's a multitude of problems here. There's a minute of footage missing from the recording. 11:59 p.m. to midnight is gone. The lighting changes, perhaps the camera settings change on top of that, given the distinct aspect ratio shift. And the simple explanation is something to do with the rollover between days on a 24-hour cycle. But even if that were to be true, having a minute missing every day of security recording footage in a prison is a massive liability, especially the one that has Epstein in it, and further exacerbates the problem that nothing we see is trustworthy at all right now. What is the threshold for any one individual person, in your mind, let's say, where too many things are conveniently wrong? What is that threshold? The cameras were conveniently almost all broken, but now we have footage. Except the footage doesn't really show us anything, and the railings are different. Turns out there's another entrance, one we can't see, and the original report is wrong in multiple ways about who did what and when, across everything from guards sleeping to falsified count. Meanwhile, the government is quite literally taunting people, not only releasing documents that were already public, but further redacting them, as if that somehow fulfills the numerous promises that they made about releasing the Epstein files, as well as the little black book, when they clearly don't even know what that is, seemingly believing that the little black book is a client list, which it isn't, and it never was. But now for the capstone. After this footage came out, after the memo about closing the case, no clients, no blackmail, no further investigation into the corrupt elites who associated with Epstein for years of their lives at the height of his trafficking empire, after the footage in the video and the fact that it's just suicide, so don't talk about it anymore, this is how the US government responded. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claimed that Attorney General Pam Bondi never claimed to have the client list on her desk, publicly to the press. I can't help but think of Orwell, 1984. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. When Pam Bondi was confronted in a cabinet meeting directly, President Trump jumped in, saying, "Are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time? Do you feel like answering?" Where, in the very same meeting, minutes later, he was talking about whether or not he would get gold leaf and put it on the corners of the molding in the room. Talking about the man responsible for hundreds of victims trafficking to the world's most powerful elite after we are told that nothing happened with no further investigation is a waste of time. But talking about the gold leaf molding in his palace, that's worthwhile. That's what we should be doing. I don't understand how anyone can look at the situation objectively and have anything positive to say. I'll finish with this. Jeffrey Epstein is one of the most mysterious villains of the past century, maybe more. The sheer number of unanswered questions is staggering, but one thing above all else is abundantly clear. The elites don't play by the same rules as the rest of us. Jeffrey Epstein had his own bank called Southern Country International in the Virgin Islands. Drowned out and lost in the more recent commotion, I think, is the fact that defying his last will and testament even, his own private bank, after his death, received over $15 million in 2 transfers from his estate, and when confronted about this, the estate lawyers claimed that the payments were made in error. One of them was returned, $2.6 million, shortly after, but $12.9 million transferred from his estate posthumously to a bank that he owned disappeared. 2 weeks after the transfer occurred, year-end filings showed that the bank had only $500,000 in assets. But meanwhile, you and me and all the rest of us, that is, people who didn't fly to Epstein's private island on his little plane, we live our lives in fear of what happens when you make a mistake on your $3,000 annual tax return. Because the government, by the people and for the people, no longer properly represents the people. It represents those with power and money, nobody else. That's it. If my channel disappears, you probably know why that is, but I honestly just really felt like talking about this, even if it ends up being a net negative for me. If you want support, there's a link down below, a bunch of links down below, a special VPN deal, locals and Patreon. Those are by far the best way, channel memberships as well, and more, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching. Question everything, and have a nice night.